Today we're going to take a brief walking tour around the Speaker Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building and talk a little bit about why that's here. It's kind of a cognate to the Maine Capitol. It was actually built prior to the construction of the Maine Capitol, about 12 years prior. The design actually stemmed from the White City movement, the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Folks from here that worked for the Public Ground and Buildings had traveled out to Chicago and saw the World's Fair and were so impressed with these monumental buildings that they produced there that they came back and they wanted to make a first, what they would call modern fireproof office building here in Harrisburg. They had a design competition, appropriated $500,000, and they got an amazingly beautiful building for that amount. And they hired a Philadelphia architect named John Torrey Windrum. And he's the one that came up with the design and all the elements in here. It was originally designed as what's called the Executive Library and Museum Building. They broke ground on October 2nd of 1893, and by October 31st of 1894 they were completely finished with it. And they handed over the keys to the Public Grounds and Buildings at that time, and it was occupied. Those different agencies occupied it for different time periods. When the new building was built, the governor moved into quarters there. So it was the first time that the governor at that time had space within the legislative office buildings. And it also housed the Pennsylvania State Library, as well as having a room up on the second floor for the State Museum. So Secretary of Commonwealth, Auditor General, all of those agencies moved out. The museum was here until 1964 when the new William Penn Museum was built, and the library moved out in 1931 over to the Forum, or what was then the Education Building. It was restored from 1997 to 1999, and late October of 1999, the General Assembly, in honor of Speaker Matthew Ryan and his efforts at starting Capitol preservation and efforts to restore and preserve our Capitol buildings, not just the Maine Capitol, but this building as well, renamed it in his honor, the Speaker Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building. We'll take a walk around and show a little bit about what the historic office spaces were and where those different agencies occupied, and a little bit about the design and construction of the building. We're on the landing of the staircase within the Speaker Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building, or the old Executive Library and Museum Building. We're going to talk a little bit about the design elements and the architecture within the building. So the overall building is Italianate, which is a little bit different than the other neoclassical buildings that we have here within the Capitol complex in Capitol Park. A couple of the different design elements here are what we call cane stone, which is imported from France. It's a sandstone. I think it was a lot easier to sculpt and to carve, and you can see the carved ornamentation, the floral patterns and little cherubic heads and stuff that are carved into the cane stone. And then up above there's some famous Pennsylvanians, Meade, Franklin, Mifflin, Wayne, are all depicted. Their bas-relief heads are depicted up above the pediment of the door here. Sandstone staircase. When you look at the walls in here, they're a material that's called scagliola, which is a neat term. It is a faux marble. It was a lot cheaper at that time to kind of make this plaster glue pressed scagliola and have it be decorative than to have real marble wainscot in the building. And it was commonly used throughout the latter 19th century and into the early 20th on more monumental buildings. So the design here of the staircase that we're standing on, John Torrey Windrum was the architect, and he modeled it off of Antonio Rizzo's staircase for the Doge's Palace in Venice. So it's taken almost verbatim out of that. And this was a common thing that architects would do, was to incorporate design elements from famous buildings, European stylings into structures here in America when they designed. We're up in what was originally the museum room within the Speaker Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building. And this room was designed with the first state museum in mind. This housed the Civil War flags for the Commonwealth, were in large cases that were arranged here in the center. And then if you look behind me, you'll see a copy of what was the Peter F. Rothermel's Pickett's Charge, which was a series of, I believe there were 7 murals commissioned by the state in 1866 and finished in 1872. And they all hung, the original ones hung here in the museum section of the building. The second floor balcony levels actually housed the archaeological artifacts, botany artifacts that were the precursors of the modern State Museum. That's really where the museum evolved from. So there were Civil War accoutrements, drums, rifles, all types of military kind of regalia, as well as the flags that were here. And the museum stayed here, and then it occupied the rest of the front of the building here after the executive offices moved into the new Capitol building. So they remained here until 1964, and then they moved over to the planned William Penn Memorial Museum, which is now the State Museum of Pennsylvania. The Lincoln statue was in here at the time that the museum was here, and it went back over to the museum in 1964, and it's on permanent loan in here from the State Museum. So just to represent how it looked partially from that time period of 1893 till 1964, when the museum moved out of here, we brought the statue back in and had it restored. It was converted into a library, a research library, reference library for House Republican staff and legislators. Now we're on the second floor of the Ryan Building in what used to be the original governor's reception room. So there would have been 4 governors, Governor Pattison, Governor Hastings, Governor Stone, and Governor Pennypacker, that used this building from 1893 or 1894 when it was finished until 1906 when the new Capitol was done. So this is the first public receiving room that the governor would have had. Prior to this, he would have used a space called Keystone Hall, which was the governor's mansion that was down on Front Street. And so this was the first formal place he could receive guests and entertain and have meetings in the Capitol. And his office was just adjacent to this, out in the rooms at the front, kind of, I guess it would be the southwest corner of the building. The opposite of this chamber on the second floor were the Secretary of Commonwealth's offices. And then at the very front were the Attorney Generals, just off to the side of the governors. And then down on when you come in the main or front door of the Ryan Building, the lower level was the Auditor General's off to your right, and then the Treasury Department took up the entire space. So that was the contingent that was kind of the executive offices here in the building. One thing of note is the all hand-carved, what we call the William Penn fireplace that occupies this chamber. I believe it was an ornamental, non-operable fireplace at that time, just strictly decorative, but it has the seal of William Penn and a carved bust of him up at the top of what we'd call the fireplace overmantel. On the lower levels are marble. I think they're red Numidian and a light sienna marble that are the wainscot for this chamber. Now it's been converted, obviously, at the restoration into a legislative conference room. We're at the rear of the Ryan Building. And this area actually served as the part of the building that was the State Library. So in 1894, this became the State Library. As I said, John Torrey Windrum designed the building. Doyle and Doak were the builders. And their design plan for the back here was kind of somewhat avant-garde for the time. It was a little innovative, in which they would have these alcove spaces with natural light coming in. So within the stack area, you could see all of the books and all of the volumes. Supposedly it was supposed to be able to hold 500,000 books when it was constructed. The problem with the alcove system when it was done was actually it allowed you to see into the stacks, but it restricted light into the main reading room, which is where we're standing right now. So the main reading room was often dark, it was drafty, it was a thoroughfare. People were always walking through it to get to other buildings and other locations. So by the late 1920s and 1930s, the State Library decided that it needed, it had outgrown the space, and the space really wasn't conducive to what they wanted in a library, which was a highly lit, quiet space. And so they built the education building, what we call the Forum building now, and they moved into the new Forum building, and that's where the State Library continues to be to this day. So after that, the space back here was titled the Annex. As I said, the museum was up front. And this became office space here at the rear of the building, and it was restored again in the late 90s, repainted, and the chandeliers rebeaded and re-gilt, and so it's serviceable office space within the Ryan office building today. These chandeliers are unique because they actually lower down, so there's a pulley system that you can drop these down to the ground to access the crystal on the glass and to clean the chandeliers, and then you hoist them back up. I hope you've enjoyed your tour of the Ryan Building, the oldest building that we have remaining on the Capitol complex. My name is Jason Wilson, and I'm with the Capitol Preservation Committee.